So, Pastor Nate, you're telling me that the party that's supposedly all about representation doesn't want more people to be represented in the Congress.
That's what I'm hearing. Let's get into it.
All right, let's go. Hey everybody, welcome back to the Under God podcast. Today I'm joined by Pastor Nathan Brown, where we're going to be diving into our weekly culture review, where we take a look at all of the headlines of the past week and talk about how we can process them biblically and what the Bible might have to contribute to the conversation. Pastor Nate, I'm so glad to be back with you. How are you doing?
I'm glad to be here too, man. We've got to talk about representation because the party of DEI, who wants everyone included except those pesky conservative Republicans. What's going on with the redistricting stuff?
And actually, they don't want more Hispanics included because the new redraw of the Texas political map is actually going to increase the number of native Hispanics that are represented in the
I wonder why that might be. All of a sudden we want illegal immigrants to have a vote, but now like actual citizens that happen to be Hispanic to live in South Texas, I wonder what might have happened.
Might it be because Trump carried Hispanics in the last election?
Oh, so they actually care about family values. They want their daughters to still be daughters.
Yeah, that's right.
And their sons to still be sons.
They don't want to chop.
Not competing against each other on a football field. And so magically, the Democratic Party has gone so far to the freak left that people who were in their corner for many years are going, I can't go there with you. They want different representation. And now we can't let them have it.
That's right. So to bring everybody up to speed on this story, this is one that we touched on a little bit last week on our culture review, but Texas has been in the middle of a redistricting hearing where the president of the United States came out and he said, I would like Texas to look at adding 5-ish congressional seats. That's what we think we can get out of Texas by redrawing their state lines. Now, a couple of things to note on that. It is somewhat abnormal to redraw in the middle of the decade. However, it's not the first time that it's been done. In fact, in 2003, this is the last time that we did this in Texas. It's not even abnormal for parties to do it on a political basis. In fact, that's what it normally is. I want to get more into that here in a second. But Texas said, you know what? That is a great idea because currently our districts don't really make sense and they're not representing the proportion of voters that we have that are conservative and Republicans in the state. And so we looked at our districts and the House started to draw up a map, and that was a few weeks ago, and it started to pass out of the committee, and the Democrats said, we've got to get out of here. And so they jumped on a plane, they flew to Illinois, one of the most gerrymandered states in the entire country.
Where they went.
We're out of here. We're going to places that are worse than this, but they're better for us. And so they hopped on a plane. They went to the state of Illinois and some in New York, and they have literally fled the state. And so since that's happened, there was a little bit of a holding pattern this past week, except for some action from Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton, because an interesting element was added to the story where Beto O'Rourke came in. And he started trying to sponsor.
Beto, what is that guy going to get? How many times do you have to get beat before he goes away?
Beto, oh my gosh.
What is he won anything?
Last time he was elected was like 2014.
For what?
I don't like
dog catcher or something?
Yeah, I don't know. Local city dog catcher. So Beto, who has tons of fundraising money left over from when he ran against Cruz for the Senate, Beto started funding these people, and he started eliciting for other people to donate to these people as well through a PAC. But essentially what he was doing...
I've been wondering who's paying for this stuff. So that's
so
who's paying
Beto has been funding them, but Beto was taking what Attorney General Paxton called Beto bribes. He coined that. He said, these are the Beto bribes. He's been bribing them to remain out of state and have a dereliction of duty. And so he's literally, what he's doing is illegal. And so the Attorney General's office said, hey, you're doing this in plain sight. We're going to prosecute you. A court order gave what's called a TRO, which is a temporary restraining order, which says, hey, there's enough here for us to look at and say, this is illegal. We're going to shut this down. So the court slaps a TRO on it, says, you cannot fundraise anymore. You can't give money anymore. And Beto says, I'm going to do it anyway. And so recently the AG's office says, well, we're going to start seeing whether or not we need to issue a warrant for your arrest and your part in this, because it is actually in violation of Texas law and you're doing it very publicly. And so we're going to respond by doing our job. The governor, for his part, has said, look, I am going to call as many special sessions as it takes until we get this map passed. And so there's talk about...
Do you think he'll follow through with that?
I think he will.
Okay.
I think last session he called a ton of special sessions. I think he'll at least do that. He had made some big talk, and he tried to file kind of his own lawsuit to try and get their seats vacated. Again, the AG's office has filed with Scotex, which we talked about last week, to try and get those seats vacated. we're waiting on that. We want them to rule in the favor of the people of Texas. We also want them to rule swiftly, right? We don't want it to get dragged out. So that is in the works. All of these things are happening, and there's pressure coming from all sides against the Texas Democrats. Meanwhile, they are still taking to their Instagram stories and talking about how oppressed they are while they're living off of their Beto bribes. They're talking about how hard their lives are. They're talking about how they're standing up. They're the last bastion of freedom, right? Democracy is going to die without them. And that kind of brings us into the larger conversation about the tactics that they're using, talking about, okay, well, what happens next? Pastor Nate, what's your initial take just on this story?
I've just been trying to play catch up. I mean, I've had my head under a rock for the last 2 weeks working on some stuff, and I sort of came up for air and saw everything that was going on.
Yeah.
And it is pretty wild. Also, it's interesting to me. I was just reading yesterday that basically everyone knew that this was about to happen.
Yeah.
And Dustin Burrows, who's the Speaker of the House here in Texas, I'm pretty sure he's a Democrat, like, at heart.
He was, so his whole deal for our listeners is he was elected by a coalition of peel-away Republicans and the majority of the Democrats. So the entirety of the Democrat bloc voted for him. A minority of the Republican voting bloc voted for him for Speaker. So he's a Republican, but kind of in name only.
Yeah, yeah. And if you want more details on that, you should go search up Undergrad Podcast with Representative Nate Schatzline.
Yep,
he went into
all that,
great detail about Texas politics. But I was a little bit wondering, like, why didn't he just lock the doors?
Yeah.
Like when he had them all, he let them all leave. And so I just want to point that out. Like the Democrats are doing crazy stuff, but they have been empowered, and Burrows, like the guy, I just plays both sides of
well, because now he's trying to play hardball.
Now he's trying to play hardball. Like no one believes him. Like you're their buddy. You empowered them. You gave them extra stipends.
Which is like he's doing what he can do now. But the thing that he should have done was to not let it happen in the first place. And he was the one with the most of the power. It's funny. In 2003, when Texas went through this redistricting thing, they literally did this. They locked the doors and they said, "You are not leaving until we have a new map."
Well, he should have done that,
there.
but courage doesn't come up on the top 10 in the list for him. But anyway, so you're calling it redistricting, but they call it gerrymandering.
Yeah.
Who's gerrymandering?
So Jerry. All right, this is actually a funny story. So it's named after Elbridge Gerry. So it technically should be called gerrymandering, but it's spelled Gerry. And so Elbridge.
Fun fact: that's my mom's name, and that's how it's spelled.
Elbridge Gerry?
No, Jerry. Gerry.
Yeah, Gerry. So Elbridge Gerry was a governor of Massachusetts way back when. And in 1812, he was one of the ones who helped manipulate a new map for his state. He was looking at his state, and he was a Democrat, right? So to be clear, he was a Democrat, and he said, "I want to have more House representation for the Democrats in my state in the Congress than the Republicans." And so his tactic, his idea, was that he was going to draw a bunch of lines that didn't make sense. And this first took place under him, but it's been commonplace since then. And actually, a fun fact about the name is Elbridge Gerry, right? The district that gave it the name, gerrymandering, is because the line across the entire state looked like a salamander, right? And so that's the image that it had. And so people looked at this and they said, that congressional district makes no sense. You're just trying to pull in the people that are going to give you the representation that you want. And they said, it looks like a salamander, and they put his name together, and that's how you get gerrymandering. And so that is the origin of the term gerrymandering. And so,
now I've had a lot of people ask me, like, what does that name even mean? Like, as
now you know.
You're trying to like figure out how to make it make sense.
Yeah.
So
and since then, and so this was a long time ago.
Etymological lesson.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's the origin of the word. Since then, it has become largely common practice. It's a political tool that gets used on both sides. And we'll get into that here in just a second on some of the disproportional representation in the states. But it's a way for states that are majority conservative or Democrat to essentially try and use the political power that they have. It's a political tool. So for people who say, "Oh no, it's all just about, upstanding for the law and standing up for democracy," the truth is there are things in politics that are political in nature and are about you trying to gain the upper hand. This is one of them, and that's okay.
But it is in part about representation.
That is true. It is in part about. It's not excluding representation as a portion that matters, but there is also a political element to it, and I think that we're being dishonest if we don't say, like, yes, we want to be more represented than other people.
Sure.
That's true.
But the reason I say it is actually about representation. I mean, first of all, we have a Republican form of government which is a representational form of government. So representation is important.
Yes.
And we're not just talking about demographic representation based on the weird, skin color.
Oh, no, we're not talking about that at all. We're talking about ideological representation.
We're talking about ideological representation, but we're also talking about geographical representation, right? And people in a certain area vote for a person in their area to go and represent them. And you do have some weird stuff. I was looking at the map of Illinois when they were talking about, man, why do these people go to Illinois? That's the weirdest looking. Maybe we can get a graphic on this, Mr. Producer, and show people what Illinois looks like right now, because it is a crazy looking line. When you look at it, you're like, what do these people have to do with these people up here? And the whole idea is that power should be local. And when some of these lines are drawn, they're drawn in such a crazy way, it no longer becomes local. But
if you look at the Illinois map, for what it's worth, for our viewers, you will literally see that the entire state, except these like tiny slivers, are all Democrat represented, right? They're just, it's just
for sure
completely drawn in ways that don't make sense.
For sure. But in some ways, if we think about how this affects national politics, because what this does is determines who and how many, seats you have. I guess not how many. The census determines how many, and then the lines, the districts, if you will, determines who's going to be your representative in the federal government. So we're talking about a balance of power in the federal government, which is why Trump's going, hey, I should have more people voting with me. I should at least have more Republicans based on a lot of these lines. And what I found so ironic, I actually didn't know this, because I do enjoy politics, but I've paid a lot more attention to hyper local politics than maybe the national stuff over the last number of years. And one of the things I didn't realize was just how bad representation actually is in so many other states. And so what you're seeing right now, from what I can tell, is that, of course, it's coming from Trump. I get that, and people are like, oh, you're just doing the bidding of the king, whatever. I totally, I'm not even going to dignify those crazy comments with a response. But what I do find is that Texas is going, hey, other states have used this practice of gerrymandering to basically eliminate any Republicans, or to minimize the number of Republicans that actually can go to the federal government by way of a House seat, and they've limited them and it's really affected them in a disproportionate way. And so now Texas is going, well, we're a little disproportionate the other way, so why don't we go ahead and make a change? And so the Democrats are now all of a sudden, I'm watching our good buddy James Tallarico, on an interview on Fox News, trying to basically say, oh, we've never done this. This is all Republican stuff. The guy's so dishonest, man. Every time he opens his mouth, I'm like,
go check out. We have 2 episodes.
Which lie is going to come out next? Be so good at telling lies, man. Maybe just the best. Maybe Obama might be the only one better than him.
Liar there's ever been.
Never been a better liar than he. But Daniel, I want you to take us through, because I do think that the details matter in the conversation. And you've done your homework and taken a look at these percentages and how they break down. Walk us through some of the blue states and why this is actually so necessary right now.
So for instance, Massachusetts, right, where we talked about just a second ago, where gerrymandering all began, the GOP has 30% of the voting share in Massachusetts, but they get 0 of the 9 congressional seats. In New Jersey, Republicans have 40%, right? But we all think of New Jersey as a completely blue state. Why? Because they only hold 3 of the 12 seats, and Democrats hold all of the rest of them. You look at other states like California, well, Republicans actually earn 40% of the vote, 39% of the vote in California, but they only hold 17% of the congressional seats. Same thing with New York. GOP vote share hits 44%, yet they secure just 7 of the 26 seats. Democrats take 19. In Maryland, Republicans pull 35% of the vote, but only win 1 out of 8 seats. And it actually does this thing where it creates this image for people that these are just deep blue states, and that there's really no Republican representation. I bet if you walked up to people and you asked them how much of California vote share, just raw Republican versus Democrat in a national election is Republican versus Democrat, they would tell you it's 80-20. 80-20 Democrat to Republican, 90-10, right? Most people think that there's hardly any Republicans. They say all the Republicans just live in Orange County and everybody else is a Democrat, right? That's what they tell you. But the truth is, it's like 40% of California. By the way,
that's
Ronald Reagan was the Republican governor from California. It's not so long ago that California was a Republican state. There is a large share of people And this gives a lot of credence to the idea that got talked about in the 2016 election, or the 2024 election, that there really is a silent majority of people that are out there, but they just have had their political influence stolen from them. And so what the GOP in Texas is trying to do, and what the federal government under President Trump is trying to do, is basically say, hey, you've been underrepresenting our ideas, right? And we want our ideas to be properly and correctly represented. We are going to use the political power that we have to take that back, because what's happening right now is that you guys are influencing policy in a way that's not actually representative of your states. And so we have political power in Texas. We are going to wield that political power to the betterment of the country, because your ideas are harmful and they're bad. And we want our ideas to be the ones that the country is governed by, because our ideas are good and your ideas are bad. And that's just the way that the game is played. And I think it's actually a really noble thing that President Trump is doing, which really leads a bit, by the way, it leads to another part of the story, which is him calling for a redo of the census.
Yeah.
So I don't know. You can talk about that. I can talk about that. You want to get into the census?
Yeah, let's talk about the census. I mean, I have more questions than answers. Like I said, I'm excited to be on this episode so I can learn from you about what's been going on. But I heard a couple things and it raised a few questions, and so I'll ask them. Maybe your podcast listeners
let's do it.
are having these same questions, then you can talk about them. So, one of the questions is, of course, like why like we have a census schedule, so why would we be doing it now? And I know there's an answer for that you can give. But another thing that I heard talked about by someone who worked for the Census Bureau for years was talking about how much, and you and I know this from just putting on an event at a church. Like we met yesterday, and I'd talk about calendar planning and how far back you have to go from, that sort of forced pressure event when the event takes place. Well, everything else has to get ready before that. And this guy was talking about how basically it's a multi-year, like a 5 to 6 year process to even get ready to have a census. Right. And so I heard Trump calling for a new census. I think I know some of the reasons why he might want to see one done right now, but I don't even know if it's possible after hearing some of the people talk about like what goes into it. It made a lot of sense. I mean, you got to hire some 80,000 people, and I mean there's all this stuff so that you have to do to get ready and get all of the locales ready. So talk us through it, man. What's the reason, and is it even feasible?
So the short answer is the biggest question that you asked there was the first one, which is it constitutionally allowable, is essentially the question. Can we have a census more often than every 10 years? And so here's what the Constitution says. The Constitution says you must have a census every 10 years, meaning that you cannot go longer than 10 years without having a census. It has been the standard practice to have a census every 10 years. Now, the Constitution does not prevent us from having a census more than every 10 years. Okay. The idea is that you cannot go longer than 10 years without doing it. Why? Because the census affects congressional apportionment, meaning that the number of Congress people that each state is allowed comes directly as a result of the census. And this is why this is such a big deal.
This is like a fully authorized federal census. Like Texas can't go do their own census.
Right. Texas cannot go do it. We want this. It is held by the Census Bureau. And by the way, Trump's direction for them to carry one out is fully legal. I'm sure that the Democrats will try to challenge it in court, but the truth is a census can go forward right now.
Okay.
The practical question of how fast can it go forward really remains to be seen, but I do not believe that it actually takes 6 years to do a census.
Yeah.
Now, here's the other thing. The reason that the census largely takes so long is because in the last census, one of the reasons it took so long is because they are counting illegal immigrants. And this is really one of the key things, is that they're waiting on all these people to respond to the census. They're giving all these periods of time. Look, the federal government under President Trump has already been 10 times more efficient than any federal government I've ever seen. They've deregulated. They've done a lot of things to increase efficiency. I think that he could get a census done in 2 years. I don't know if he can get it done by the 2026 midterms. Okay. That's really the political question at play.
Yeah.
But I believe that by the time his term is out, that there will be a census that's complete, assuming that they don't hold it up in court. But the big reason is...
So let me go ahead. So I wasn't a big fan of Trump's first Operation Warp Speed.
Yes.
To try to force inoculations to people too fast.
Yeah, the vax.
Even in the last election, as people were going around, touting that as one of his, that was like, for me, that was one of his biggest failures.
Yeah.
And I understand he was doing it on the advice of a lot of other people. And
yeah, sure.
he like all of us kind of got caught, like, what do we do? Like, I haven't been alive for a pandemic before. But I would like to see an Operation Warp Speed census. Maybe
that would be better.
Census style. But speaking of Operation Warp Speed, I think something about that time in our nation's history, which is now 5 years ago, so I guess it's starting to qualify as history, has something to do with why he wants a census now.
Say that again.
COVID. I mean, is it?
Yeah.
The COVID count was part of the reason. That's what I'm hearing.
That's what she said. Yeah. So COVID was a big part of the 2020 census, and so the last census that was conducted was 2020. And so there's two major flaws with the 2020 census. One, because of COVID, in that period of time, a lot of the way that the census is done was done differently, meaning that responses didn't have to be verified. A lot of things were bypassed in the same way that they bypassed a lot of things during COVID, right? They basically said, hey, we have these emergency powers. We're doing all this stuff. We're going to do it differently. And so the count is massively skewed during COVID because of that. And then also in the 2020 census, the larger thing is that they elected to count illegal immigrants in the census as citizens. And so when I say as citizens, here's what I mean.
Okay.
I mean that one person, no matter whether you're a citizen of the United States or not, to one person, you are counted, no matter what. So somebody who's here illegally can respond to the census and be counted for apportionment, for purposes of congressional apportionment, the same as you or me. Now, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
The Constitution specifically addresses who's to be counted in the census. Now, what it doesn't say is, are illegal immigrants supposed to be counted in the census? But the way that it's written, it basically says,
what does it say?
It says that people are supposed to be included in the census with the exception of what are called Indians living under other reservations. So basically the idea at the time of the Constitution's writing is they're addressing the issue of, hey, are Native Americans who are living on non-federal land supposed to be counted for purposes of the census? At the time, they said, well, no, because they're living on these lands we have given to them and they're theirs, right? And so that was the only difference. The way that I read it, there is not a chance in the world that when the founders are writing the part of the Constitution where they talk about taking a census, where they're looking around and they're saying, yes, we are going to include people who don't live and are not citizens of this country as citizens. I can't even imagine that they would think that that's a possibility, because that's like I'm counting a Mexican citizen as an American citizen. I'm counting a Canadian citizen as an American citizen. I'm counting a Venezuelan citizen as an American citizen.
I know some pastors that count numbers in their church like that. But anyway, keep going.
All right. So that's basically them saying you're a citizen no matter what. That does away with the idea of borders in every single sense, because I can't imagine a single framer looking around and saying, yeah, those people are supposed to be included. It's just one of those things that it's not even a thought in their mind. It's not even on the table. Okay. And so I believe that the reason the Democrats are trying to count illegal immigrants for the portion for this purpose is so that they can have their states be overrepresented. And that's exactly what you would see. They want their states to have a greater degree of representation because the illegal immigrants come to the blue states where they have these sanctuary cities set up.
And so by the way, no voter ID laws either.
Yeah, no voter ID laws and all these things.
Go there.
Yeah. So they come to Texas and then they move to California.
Wherever.
New York. They move to these places that have sanctuary cities. Why? Because one, they know that they're not going to have to deal with any kind of law or regulation there. And two, they can even get in on the goods like everybody else. They can deal with all of the benefits that those states tend to hand out.
Got it. So we're talking about representation. Now let me drop something on you here, Daniel.
All right, let's do it.
All right, so we've been talking about, everybody's talking about gerrymandering, and they're arguing over 5 seats that might get affected. I mean, it's not a guarantee, by the way. It's like probably.
It is not a guarantee. There is a gamble involved with it.
There's a gamble. I mean, those seats may still.
I mean, if we take this bet, essentially what we're betting on in Texas is that the Hispanic, at least for 2 or 3 of these seats, we're betting that the Hispanic population, which is turned towards the conservative family values party, which the Republican Party is the family's value party, they are going to continue to do that. The gamble is, well, what if that's a one-off, and then
Yeah.
Texas ends up, kind of shooting itself in the foot. There is a potential for some of that,
Yeah.
for at least a couple of those.
So here's another gamble that maybe less people know about that we could take. So when Texas was admitted into the Union in 1845, one of the unusual concessions that was made, was a condition that allows Texas at its own discretion to divide itself into multiple states.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of I'm a Texan first and American citizen second people might not like this very much. And it's hard to seeing it happen. But John Garner, who was the governor of Texas here back in the 30s, he actually was working on this and had a plan where he's looking going, hey, this place that has more land than all of New England put together should have at least 10 senators. Well, the way the Constitution's written is you can only have 2 senators per state, but he's looking saying, hey, I think we should probably go ahead and divide Texas up. 1847, Texas Governor Isaac Van Zandt actually ran on the promise of dividing Texas into at least 4 states. I don't know if you knew that. I didn't know that either.
I didn't know that.
And so I went digging. And as the story goes, if he had not died of yellow fever prior to taking office, he was elected, and that was his primary thing. He probably could have seen that desire realized. And one of the reasons that was happening because it was you're leading up to the Civil War, and there was some difference in Texas around things like slavery and whether or not black slaves or even black free people should be able to vote. There's all that stuff.
Well, should be able to vote, and then that's actually an interesting tie-in, Pastor Nate, because one of the things that their efforts to count illegals in the census kind of echoes is this idea of that goes all the way back to the famous three-fifths compromise. Which, for those of you that don't know the history of it, we look back at the three-fifths compromise, and a lot of people look at it and they just say this is one of the worst things that's ever happened. The history there is actually a little bit different. The reason that the three-fifths compromise came about is because the southern slave states were seeking to grant citizenship in name only to Black Americans, meaning that they would be counted, but only so that they could have greater apportionment for their congressional seats and have greater representation in Congress as the battle is going on to figure out what is going to happen over the question of slavery. But they're not going to be allowed to vote. They're not going to have the same rights as everybody else. They're going to be slaves. And so what they said is we want them to count as a full person, but only for these purposes. And so the compromise comes about as a result of that by the northern states, the free states actually saying, well, we believe that they're people, but we believe that they're actually complete people, and you should allow them to be fully represented. We don't want to continue the practice of slavery. We're trying to get rid of it this country. The Democrats, by the way, the entire South was a Democrat run. Right. By the way, I want everyone to know the founder of the Republican Party is Abraham Lincoln. So I feel like we don't know that for the most part in modern times.
Yeah, well, they'll tell you that in Jim Crow that everybody flipped and went to other side.
But that's not true.
It's not really true. If you go do your homework, it's just another talking point.
Yeah. But it's the same power. And they were the same power from the same party that was essentially trying to jigger the numbers in a way that would allow them to have greater political power. And here's what I would just say. There is a responsibility for those of us who are Christians when we are in the political sphere to do what we can do morally, ethically, and above and within guidance with godly moral laws to try and wield the influence that we have. Because when you don't, people who don't share your values, people who, in fact, don't share any love for God's word, who don't care about their neighbors, who don't care about doing what's right, they end up in political power, and you end up in circumstances like that where they're trying to use other people for their own gain while abusing them.
Totally, all of that happens. But I'm just floating in the midst of all of that there is another option here, and this is in response to the ideas of bringing Washington D.C. as statehood, giving Puerto Rico statehood, which I actually politics aside, Puerto Rico probably should at this point. I mean, I don't know. I might argue for that. I would just from a fairness, either
they don't view themselves as Americans largely.
Well,
that's a big deal.
They have a non-voting member. They have a non-voting member in Congress who actually just so everyone's clear. Pastor Daniel, whatever you think. In the last election, they did take a vote, and Puerto Rico would have went for DJT, and their non-voting member actually came and made a plea saying, our people want Donald Trump and are sick of the corruption of the Biden administration. So,
well, the Biden administration left them out to
that
dry.
actually happened. But what Texas could do, just to kind of finish this out here, Texas could legally split itself into 5 states. So in 1868, West Texas actually adopted its own constitution and was in the process of doing this very thing, because Texas was Democrat and they held slaves, and people in West Texas were like, no, slavery's wrong. We should get rid of that. And they wanted to actually, and it got close to happening. But then, of course, the whole Civil War and Emancipation Proclamation, all that stuff happened. Now, Nate Silver actually walked through this back in 2009 and looked at like, how could this possibly happen? What would we do? And at that point in time, he was looking at, if we were to divide Texas into 5 states, you would probably end up with like an 8-2 Republican to Democrat advantage at that time. That's in 2009. Now that was before we saw the Hispanic population in Texas and the Valley kind of start to move more to the red side. Now people are saying there's ways you could draw the lines that would likely end up with a 9-1, possibly even a 10-0 Republican advantage if Texas were to do that. So I know people say that Republicans, should stop messing with Texas and people shouldn't mess with Texas. But let me just tell you, Texas could mess with the entire United States and the full balance of power in the Senate if they really wanted to. And there could be, it'd probably take a little while and the court cases would come. But the legal precedent is there. So anyway, I don't know if you knew that.
That's a fun fact. Yeah. I'm a little bit on the, that's like a break glass in case of emergency option. That's not like, I love Texas too much, man. So it'd be hard to see unless, the whole ship was sinking and I was really sure we could make something happen.
But it's possible. It's where I have an uncle who's he's almost in many ways like a second father to me. A guy by the name of David Olive, worked in politics all life. He sent that to me this morning, and he's like, "You guys are messing around with this. Here's what you really could be doing." And so thanks Uncle D for sending that over. That was a pretty fascinating read to find out about all of that.
What I really do believe, and we'll move on to the next headline after this, is I really believe that the way that Texas goes is going to be the way that the country goes. And there's that old saying, as goes Texas, so goes the nation, as goes the nation, so goes the world. I actually believe that. And here's why I believe that. Democrats, and by the way,
I hope you're right, because it's been, as California goes, so goes the nation.
Yeah. Well,
and we do need to adjust that.
Texas has been what the Democrats have been trying to get for 20 years, because if they were able to flip Texas to a blue state, they would never lose a presidential election again. By the way, they only really need to win one more presidential election in order for them to do everything they were trying to do under Biden, which would grant amnesty to every illegal immigrant that's ever come in, and then permanently flip the country blue, which is what they did in California. And so they want Texas because they want to be able to not have to have any accountability for their power. Texas matters. Texas has the most electoral votes after California, right? Because we have the second most populous state, and California's gone blue because they followed this blueprint. If Democrats did the same thing, it would be almost impossible for the Republican Party to win another presidential election. And so Texas,
that likely could lead to another future civil war.
I mean, it could. You never know what would happen, but Texas battleground matters, right? And so when we talk about like our state house and all these things, yes, it matters for our state, but it also matters for our country.
For the whole country.
Yeah, it does matter for the whole country. And I hope that we get these seats. I hope that we're able to get a Congress that's not, having their hands so tied by a thin majority, and Trump is able to spend the last couple years of his term doing awesome things.
Yeah.
I hope all of that, because I want the country to be healthier. I want it to be better.
Speaking of a healthy country, one of my favorite places to visit in the country is our capital. And I know not everyone agrees with me, but I actually love DC. So just a little, if I wasn't pastoring a church in Central Texas, and Pastor Stephen always says, but boys can do anything, men have to pick to do one thing. So I picked one thing, right? I'm pastoring a church, so I'm not going anywhere. But if I wasn't, and I could just pick where I wanted to live, DC might actually be somewhere I'd want to go. And a lot of people think I'm crazy, but I love it there.
Yeah,
I love it. I think it's a cool place. It's beautiful. I love all the history. Yeah. I love all the.
I do love the history. I love all of those things. But
I love Northern Virginia, geographically speaking, and I love all their politics. But the one problem with DC, if you've ever been in DC late at night and then you're taking the metro by yourself, it's a little sketch. Now it's not quite as sketch as New York and some other places, but
which New York's going to get a lot worse. It looks like.
It looks like it's going to get a lot worse.
That another
but
time.
It's still a little bit. It's a little dangerous. In fact, it turns out the city of Washington, D.C. is more dangerous than Bogota, Colombia right now.
Yeah.
And our president's trying to do something about that. So
yeah. So President Trump on the 11th of August, he declared that we were going to liberate D.C. and he does this whole thing as Liberation Day. So, and I was like, all right, this is gonna be awesome. So I tune in, and he goes in and he basically says, "Hey, our capital city is a dump. People are getting murdered routinely.
Yeah.
People are getting violently attacked on a nightly basis in the capital of the greatest nation in the history of the world." And he says, we're not going to allow that to happen. So DC exists in this kind of weird sphere. So DC was originally seated by the states as its own district. It's got a lot of history, but what it lives under currently is the most recent piece of legislation regarding the governance of DC. Is called the DC House Act.
Yeah.
And so the DC House Act gives certain powers and authorities to the federal government in order to reinsert themselves in the governance of DC. And the idea was that you guys get to have your own police force, you get to have your own mayor, you guys can run yourself like your own house, but we are going to reserve the privileges that were originally given to the Congress, because in the Constitution, DC is to be run by the Congress. The DC House Act, which is passed by the Congress and therefore legal, does give powers to the executive branch in order to govern DC if situations like rampant crime happen. And so Trump basically is just coming in, the Home Rule Act. So Trump comes in and he says, hey, look, under Section 740 of the DC Home Rule Act, I am going to restore law, order, and public safety. I'm going to deploy the National Guard. I am going to take control of the police force. We are going to clean up the city because obviously it's not happening right now. I actually saw a fun clip yesterday. One of the deputy chiefs of the DC Police Department, a reporter asked him, hey, what's the chain of command now? And she looks at him and she goes, I don't know what that is. And I was like, oh no, and I was like, you look like a DEI hire. I don't know. And so I watched that and I was like, that's not great. And Trump is essentially just addressing a major problem. And people who think about, hey, I don't live in DC, I don't live in these places, I disagree with that. DC does matter for this reason. It's the capital, and it sets the standard for the way that the rest of the country is supposed to be run. Trump said it in a way that only he could. And then I'll get your thoughts on it, Pastor Nate. So in his press conference where he starts talking about all this, he says, hey, I had a great father, Fred Trump. And he says, my dad used to always tell me, son, if you go to a restaurant and you're about to walk in and the front door is dirty, don't go in. Because if the front door is dirty, the kitchen's dirty.
Wow. And
Trump said, it's like that. People come to our capital city from all across the world and they walk in and our front door is dirty. It's disgusting. Yeah. The global hegemon, the United States of America, the premier world power, and there's lots of moral and political reasons that we would like to remain that. He says, people walk into our front door and it's dirty. And he says, I'm going to clean it up because that's not the image of America that we need to have. And by the way, the idea that we have to live in cities where they're overrun with people who are riddled on drugs, like, that's not true.
Yep.
Law and order does matter. It matters for the everyday citizen. It matters to protect people. It matters to reduce crime. We have to clean that up. Trump is doing that, and I'm all for it.
I'm for it, too. I mean, one of the things that I found astounding the first time that I went to D.C., which was as an adult, I didn't get to do a field trip as a kid or any of that stuff. And so first time I was in D.C. was in 2009. And, of course, beginning of the Obama administration, all that time frame. But I remember going to Union Station, which is a famous train station there, and it's right next to the Capitol Hill. I mean, it's if you're going to take a train to Capitol Hill, there's a bunch of little stops you can get off, but like that was the train station, and then now it's part of the metro. And if you're walking out of a Senate building or whatever, that might be the closest one to grab. And so I remember going in there, dude, and like I'm like by myself. I'd gone to visit my uncle that I just mentioned, and then he dropped me off, just doing some kind of sightseeing, want to see some stuff, walking around. And I remember walking in there, and like all of a sudden I felt so uncomfortable. Yeah. And no, it wasn't because of people's skin color. It was because there were people clearly strung out on drugs.
Yeah.
I immediately was being asked for money.
Which you and I as pastors have
being-
dealt with all sorts of those people. You recognize it instantly once you've dealt with it.
That's
for a while.
right.
Yeah.
Instantly. So you're seeing people that are not in their right mind. They're asking for money. Some were being aggressive, trying to use some, street hustle tactics, try to get you, engaged in a conversation when you know that they're after something, talking about your clothes or whatever. There's just different things that you learn over time to recognize. And I remember walking in there, and I mean, like, I can see the Capitol Hill, like right next to me, like I'm right there, and I'm feeling so unsafe. And that was my first impression, honestly, of like downtown DC. So I get where he's coming from. I guess I'm curious, and I know we're kind of running a little long here on our culture review episode, but is this like a time banded thing? Is he like, is this like 90 cleanup program, or is this like indefinite control? Or?
I think it depends on, whether or not he's able to pass something through legislature. There's no time limit on him having authority over the city. He's the president of the United States. He has certain powers that have been granted to him. I don't know that he wants to continue to run it that way forever. He hasn't really commented on that to my knowledge. But here's what I do know. I know that he does not want incompetent people running the District of Columbia, and he believes that Mayor Muriel Bowser and the people that there are incompetent. He believes that they're not able to do the job, and he cares about our image to the world. That's also why he's also doing other stuff too. Not just the cleanup, but he's like renovating the ballroom at the White House. I don't know if you know this.
Building a new one.
Yeah, building a brand new one.
Big, beautiful ballroom.
Yeah, beautiful ballroom. Because it's so tiny, and he's not able to host these parties, these estate parties.
Yeah, if you've been in there, it's shockingly small when you walk in. You're like, this is uncomfortable.
And he's donating all his salary and a lot of his own money to do that. Why? Because he cares about the way that people view the nation, and there is a sense of national pride that really does matter. That's why he's doing the big birthday party next year, for the 250th birthday party. It's like when you walk in a place, and we do this at our church all the time. Do you take pride in what you have? Do you take pride in the culture that you have? Do you take pride in the house, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if I was walking next to you in our church, and I looked at the floor and saw trash sitting on the floor, and I didn't pick it up, you would whack me on the arm and you'd say, I know you saw that, pick it up. Because that's a culture foul in our church.
Right.
Because it's like, we care about things being done right. We care about things being presentable for other people. Trump cares about that for our nation's capital. He cares about it for the whole country, because other people look at that and they say, okay, they take care of the things that matter. They take care of the details. They don't let things turn to crap. And honestly, I think that's great. I'm excited about it.
That's great. Well, I need you to catch me up on one more thing, because again, I'm here with you trying to learn what's been going on the last couple of weeks. So I heard something about the federal government can now actually hire based on merit, which sounds crazy to say out loud, because that's what we should always do, is hire based on merit.
Yeah.
What's been going on, Daniel?
We talked about this a little bit last week. And so the Supreme Court has overturned a decision where we were not allowed to hire based on merit. And essentially, I wanted to catch you up on this one because it's such a big deal. And there's already been people who are trying to see what lawsuits they can pursue over it. So the update is that a lot of people came out in the past week and said, we want to sue against this. There was a law in place that had come from essentially an injunction where they had said, hey, look,
a law came from an injunction.
So all of this stuff comes
sound like a law.
Comes from somebody suing against the federal government and saying, hey, I don't think you should be allowed to take placement tests in order to be staffed in the federal government. Competency should not be the thing that's mattered. And Pastor Stephen and I talked about that a little bit last week, and it's already getting challenged in court. Now, the thing is, I don't see any real path to victory. No, not even the most liberal judges have jumped in on this and said that, and you're starting to see the story fade away, because a lot of the people who typically jump in and they say, hey, look, we're a liberal judge in like the greater state of California. I'm a federal judge. I'm gonna slap an injunction on you. So you can't do this. None of that has even happened yet. And so all of the media who, in the initial part of the story coming out, decried it as being supremely racist and all these things, because that was the original claim, it's already starting to die down. And the legal front that's taking place of it is that there's now a new legal story which has come out this week about potentially having not only this old story overturned, but Obergefell, which, if you'll remember, the 2015 case legalizing homosexual marriage, also might be overturned. And so that's the story I wanted to catch you up on the first story and kind of give you an update. But I also wanted to tell you that one of the things that we could see happen potentially in the next couple of years is the Supreme Court, which has now agreed to hear a case from Kim Davis.
Okay, is
challenging
this the lady who was sued?
Yes.
Okay.
So Kim Davis, for our listeners, is a lady who lived in Kentucky, and she was a clerk that refused to sign off on a gay marriage license. And she said, I'm not going to do that under religious...
I remember watching it real time, yeah.
Religious preferences, and she got all sorts of hate and death threats and all these things. And she said, look, my job is to sign off on marriage licenses. I don't believe that two men getting married is a marriage. You can go to another clerk. I'm just not going to sign it off. And all sorts of legal trouble ensued for her. Now she is appealing because of a lot of the Trump administration coming in and saying, hey, there's a lot of things that the federal government was doing that aren't in accordance with the law. There's a lot of laws that have been passed based on what we believe to be unjust. We're going to stop the political persecution of Christians in the federal government. We're going to do all of these things. We're going to overturn all of these things that for decades people just went along as if they were the standard. And they're looking at this, and Kim Davis is saying, I see a window here of hope for me to potentially challenge everything. And she was jailed in 2015 for refusing to issue this marriage license.
Crazy.
Had to pay hundreds of thousands.
Trying to do what humans have done for all time.
That's right.
Memorial. And
so she has a real petition that's going on right now that the court's going to take up to challenge the Obergefell ruling. And now here's what that means. It doesn't mean necessarily that the Supreme Court will overturn Obergefell. It does not mean even that the court will rule on Obergefell. A lot of times what happens at the Supreme Court level is they try to cut this very narrow ruling, which addresses her claim. So her claim is that I was persecuted religiously. I was persecuted unjustly. I was persecuted unfairly because this was my religious right. I should not have been forced to engage in that conduct. And now the benefit that she has is there's other cases like the Baker, the Colorado Baker, his case is settled now. It wasn't originally at the time. So she has
even the Kennedy Bremerton could come into play on this.
Yeah. And so there's a lot of stuff that she's looking at, and her legal team is saying, a lot of these issues are clearing up in the favor of what's right, and we think we're going to take a shot here. And
yeah, why not?
But that doesn't mean that the court, when they take up the ruling, even if they rule in her favor, they could cut out a ruling that does not address the question of whether gay marriage is a right in the United States. They could essentially snake around that question and just say, you were persecuted, and we're going to pay restitution to you. We're going to help you out in this way, but we're not going to address the larger question. I personally hope that they do address it, because I think that the fallout from Obergefell has been absolutely horrendous. I think that the story that
100%.
Pastor Stephen and I talked about last week with the couple that surrogacy to come, and one of them's a sex offender. All of these things are downstream from our culture looking around and just completely redefining marriage. Yeah. And so I think it would actually be a great good to society if that decision were overturned. Will it be? We won't know, honestly, for a couple of years. But the fact that the court is even going to look at it, I think, is a win.
I think it's a win too. I remember when that case was decided, and I sort of like a little bit tongue in cheek, but I was kind of serious then. Like I thought, at the time I was talking with some pastor friends of mine back in 2015. I'm like, maybe all the churches should band together and like have a marriage certificate burning ceremony and like then reissue them through the church instead of through the government. Like we reject your ability to even tell us what marriage is. And if you're going to make it something that it's not, then we're going to reject it by burning. Yeah. And so I understand there's tax implications and whatever and all of that, but it bothered me so much. Like I really did. Like we were having some fun with it, but also a little bit serious. Like I was imagining like a parking lot service where we all bring our marriage certificates and literally just burn them into shreds and then reissue new ones through the church that are honorable and according to God's ways. This is why, Peter in Acts 5:29 says we have to obey God over human authority, because that ultimately matters. But I'm with you. We also care about human flourishing. And so, no, I don't want a theocracy, but yes, I want what's best for people. So therein lies the tension of what we have to do. I'm not a Doug Wilson Christian nationalist where I think like we should actually like have, like some Christian king, like rule. I don't even, it's a little too far out there for me, but I do want the best for people. And to your point, since the 2015 decision that came down where we redefine marriage, which marriage is the bedrock for any healthy society. Right. A man and a woman get married.
It's like trying to destroy the foundation of the society and hoping everything is going to stand.
Well, if someone came over here, if they tunneled underneath this building right now and then exploded a bomb that destroyed the foundation, even if the building was still standing, it wouldn't stand correctly and it wouldn't stand for long. And so what we're seeing is in our society, we're seeing all the aftershock effects of blowing up lighting an atom bomb at the foundation of human society. And so for that reason, not because I hate gay people, I don't. I love gay people. I want people who believe they're gay. I love them enough to tell them the truth, to submit their lives to Jesus, the same way I love a porn addict and an adulterer and someone with an anger problem. And I want them to all bring all of their things.
Find the love of Christ.
I want them to find the love of Christ. But I care enough about society that I would stand against things. You know, again, I do a little bit take the position, and Paul takes this position too, by the way. He says, what do I have to do with judging outsiders on what they do? You know, I don't care what grown people do inside their bedroom that doesn't affect me and my children. Now, I have an opinion about it, but I don't actually care as long as that's where it stays. But when the decision comes from the Supreme Court, the supreme lawmakers of our land, with Moses and the Ten Commandments sitting over their head, when they come and say now that, you know, 2 men or 2 women, which, by the way, it opens the doors. We're gonna see, if we don't see the reversal of this, which I hope we do. If we don't see the reversal of this, what we're going to start to see is polygamy and polyamory.
Well,
and then
we've
we're
actually
going to
already
see
seen a huge rise of
you've seen a rise on that. We're going to see people. By the way, if this doesn't get overturned, probably before I die, some 25-year-old is going to be able to marry a 13-year-old.
That's right.
And it's going to happen in one of these Sharia towns that, by the way, Governor Abbott, you need to do something about, because
we got to talk about that next week.
Maybe we put that on deck for next week.
City,
tee it up. But yeah, epic is the wrong word. It's an epic failure of our state government. But anyway, I didn't really know much about this. Now that you told me, I'm obviously reacting in real time, getting a little fired up. But that would be great to see that overturn. Yeah, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I would love to. All right. Well, hey, everybody, thank you so much for joining us today on the Under God podcast. Until next time, I'm Pastor Daniel, joined with Pastor Nathan Brown. See you next time.
See you next time.
Thank you for joining us today on the Under God podcast. If this episode encouraged you, share it with a friend or family member. Your support helps us reach more people with God's word. Be sure to subscribe on YouTube, Rumble, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at undergodpodcast.com so that you never miss an episode. Follow us on Instagram, Facebook, X, True Social, and TikTok for more content, behind-the-scenes moments, and faith-filled encouragement throughout the week. We want to hear from you. Leave a comment, join the conversation, and send us your questions. We will be answering them in upcoming Q&A episodes. Until next time, remember to think biblically about the things that matter most.